The best bits of Joy Drive with Em and Warren. No matter where you are, you can always take Em and Warren with you. Theatre, film, TV and more. Suzy Wrong reviews it all on Joy Drive with Em and Warren.
Suzy Wrong, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Don't we just love it when pop stars turn themselves into actors?
Yeah, we do. We do.
Do we?
And we love it when Joy Drive's film, theatre and TV reviewer Suzy Wrong turns into the centrefold for Qantas magazine.
Are you allowed to say that?
Well, it's not happening until February, but in February when you're flying on a Qantas plane, I'll be in the magazine, which is a great honour.
It certainly is. How special. And hey, it's an honour to watch everything that you assign us as homework. So what did we watch this week?
The very famous Harry Styles plays Tom, an English policeman in the 1950s, who discovers through his relationships with Patrick and with Marion that he actually only likes sex with men. The feature film My Policeman, now streaming on Amazon Prime Video, deals with an issue that we can safely say is highly prevalent, especially in the past. Tom goes on to marry Marion, even though he has no sexual interest in her or indeed in any other woman. It was a difficult time for homosexuals who understandably chose safety when possible, and for the many straight passing men like Tom, getting married was virtually the only choice, lest they wish to risk ostracism and persecution. We do see gays being brutally beat up by cops in the film. The 1950s was also a very hard time for women who had to stay in difficult marriages. Singlehood and divorce were frowned upon, to say the least. Part of the film was set in the late 90s when all three characters had become elderly and when the world begins to see significant change. Some questions My Policeman asks include, can it ever be too late to live authentically? And what price freedom? The performances are good, including Harry Styles, who delivers surprising nuance, even though he does mumble quite a bit. The film is beautifully shot. It turns a mundane story into something quite engaging. And I do think that the mundanity of it is the point. We will never know how many people lived the way Tom and Marion did, but the film makes us think that their tragic story was, and probably is, terribly commonplace. The allure of safety and of belonging to the mainstream is simply too seductive for those who think they're able to pull it off. Em and Warren, what do you think of My Policeman?
I really enjoyed the soundtrack of the film. I
did too.
That was good.
I loved it. I loved the soundtrack of the film. I thought it really set the period, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought the soundtrack was really good. I thought the film overall was a little bit slow. And I guess my biggest question to pose to both of you this Tuesday is, we've celebrated stories recently that don't feature homophobia as a major plot point, and we've kind of, hailed it as being quite refreshing and like a good, refreshing take on queer stories. So how do we feel about the overall story of this featuring so much homophobia, and that this is a film that's coming out in 2022? I get it's set in the 1950s, but did we need it this year?
I think we did, to be honest with you. I think I watched it and I thought, wow, to be living your life in the 1950s and have to say, I've connected with another man, and then I'm leaving and say, can you just check the door and make sure no one is watching? I mean, I actually got upset a few times during the film, and I thought, wow, so much of this went on back there, and it still does go on, remember, a lot in other places around the world. And the police brutality, I mean, that was so raw. I haven't seen something like that for a long time on TV, and it was just a good reminder of what people have gone through and where we've come from and where we are today.
Yeah, I understand what Em was talking about. It feels like an old-fashioned film, not just that it was set in the 50s, but the whole tone and style of it felt old-fashioned. I don't think it's not charming. I think it is a charming old-fashioned film.
I agree.
I do think that the story about this sort of closet life is worth telling the story, worth showing sort of the brutality of that experience, because I do think that there are a lot of people who have gone through that, marrying people, and I'm not saying that they're not in love with each other, but the sexuality just doesn't work. And sort of this homosexuality that one of the parties are trying to suppress will, inevitably push them to act out in certain ways. And I think that's a worthy discussion to have. I think the 50s makes the story a bit easier to understand, but, I'm not surprised if this still happens a lot. People who may be, queer, I guess, but enter into marriages because that's what's expected of them, because that's what's easy for them. So I think in that way, it is a worthy thing to talk about, to think about.
And also the other thing is about the marriage as well. I mean, it enabled him to hide, didn't it? He didn't have to, no one would suspect that he was gay because he was stuck in a marriage. And I don't know, I felt for poor Marion as well, because, I mean, let's be honest, we've all had it. Well, I assume we have. There's nothing worse than having sex with someone and they don't look you in the eye. You know exactly that they're thinking of someone else.
Oh, God. It never happens to me. Have you seen my Instagram?
That is the thing about this story, though. And I think Marion even says it, towards the end of the film. She says, like, none of us are happy. And that's like the saddest and the most tragic part about this entire story. It's like literally no party is actually fulfilled and having a genuine relationship, openly and honestly, because they can't, it's not allowed. And that, it is really, I mean, I would say one of the major adjectives I'd use to describe this film is tragic. Like, it really is. And Warren, you're so right when you said, this is, where we've come from. And also there still are people that are living and having to try to survive in situations that are like this. So yeah, it is, an important film to watch, I guess, to know, I guess, like, you need to appreciate that tragedy
the
in order
legacy.
to... Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's so many things that we take for granted now. And, I like that the film sort of gives quite a lot of time to Marion, that it was not only about the gay men in the story, and I appreciated that, because I think it's easy to talk about the 1950s and, the years before that was a hard time for gays, but, for women, it was terrible. And I witnessed my mother in the 70s and 80s, which is, many years after this story had taken place, and the kind of things that she had to bear with. And, now I often get little flashbacks of the things that she had to do that are so completely incomprehensible by today's standards, because she was a stay-at-home mom and had no options outside. And then the power imbalance of what my father was able to get away with, and my father wasn't queer or anything, but, just the imbalance of a woman's place at home and a woman's place within a marriage. In this one, because her husband was gay, it sort of magnifies a little bit, I guess, to see how little power she had, in 40 years of marriage. She had to wait 40 years until the 90s when things were beginning to change. And she was, I guess in her 60s, approaching 70s, before she had any sort of sense of self or power to be able to say, you know what, I think I can walk out.
Yeah. And the other thing is, Suzy, I think, we saw that reflected in the film. We are talking about The Policeman, of course. And it raised a question for me, and I think this applies, not only if, you're in a marriage for a certain reason and it's not love, or if you're even start having an affair with someone or whatever, but there are more than two people involved. You've got to protect the third person in the relationship and make sure that they aren't hurt and that their life isn't sacrificed for the others. And that came across for me in this film really strong.
Yeah, and it's also the nature of cheating, isn't it? Like the word cheating, which is still a very thing that every one of us sort of grapples with. What does it mean to cheat? Because is it about the lie? Is it about keeping it a secret? And if you do open it up, does it become okay? And I don't think it is, because there's still a lot of feelings to take care of, even if you are trying to have open relationships. Just because you take out the lying portion of it doesn't make it. I don't know how much easier it makes it. Does the honesty make it a bit easier, or does the jealousy just becomes too much to bear? I don't know.
On a different note, we've spoken a lot, throughout our conversation, Suzy, about the idea of queer actors playing queer roles. And in this film, we've got a bunch of actors. I'm not sure about the majority of them, but the person that I wanted to touch on is Harry Styles, because Harry Styles hasn't necessarily come out as an LGBTQ.
Anything.
Yeah, exactly. And has openly said like, oh, you know, it's not important. Like we don't need to have this conversation. Don't need to validate it. And I wonder if, you know, being openly accepting of, in the sense of I am this, is an important thing, especially for someone that's going to play a gay character.
I think you need to pay the rent to stay under the roof, to stay in the house. Because I think for those of us who are out and proud, we do pay a lot. Like, you know, we do make a lot of sacrifices. If you're in the entertainment industry and you're an out gay man, for example, there are opportunities that will be shut out from you, you know? So I think it's unfair if you are not willing to pay the rent and then come in and take all these opportunities by saying that, oh, I'm an actor. The point of my existence is that I can do anything, which is always the argument.
Yeah.
I just feel like there's just something really unfair about that.
Suzy,
But on the other hand, I don't think the film would have been made if someone like Harry Styles wasn't
100%.
attached
His
to
name
it.
was first on the, literally before anything else on the screen.
And it's sort of a really quiet film. It's really hard, I guess, I would imagine it would have been hard to get the money to do it without someone like Harry Styles attached to it. So in that way, I understand.
Yeah, and it's an important story, as we've said. We want to see this story.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I thought Harry Styles did a really good job. I loved finding out about how, you know, if we transport ourselves back to the 1950s, and, you know, in some ways we're still doing it now as a community, and I always go on about it, and that is, you know, when they're defending themselves, the policeman says, oh, okay, you know what, I'm not a pervert. The perverts are the ones that walk funny or wear makeup. And I just thought, it's entrenched, isn't it? We put down each other in order to hide ourselves and to make ourselves feel better, but we should know better because we've had it done to us since we were kids, so we don't need to do it to each other.
Yeah, it's funny, like so many of us adopt these sort of I guess proximity to power. Like we learn the language of power and then we use it to weaponize against other people. And that's really ugly to see. I do feel that the film, even though it's well-meaning and sort of very elegantly made, the end was really cold. Did you feel that way?
Yeah,
I found that at the end I
cold.
wasn't very moved at all.
Yeah, it was like one very fast moment, or like two whatever. But it did seem like we're reaching this, you know, climactic point, and then it's kind of just like,
I have to
Casual
admit,
smile.
I had a bit of a cry when they touched each other.
did you?
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Okay, there you go.
I must admit, I did. I thought, oh, that's just beautiful. You know, finally, it's the last, I don't know how long, probably days or what have you, and they finally had the opportunity to be alone without the third person in the room. And I thought that was absolutely beautiful. But you know what I thought was really brilliant, and I take this away from the film, is when the friend was there talking to her. I've forgotten the friend's name.
Oh,
now.
at the lunchroom at the school.
Oh,
at the lunchroom.
yes.
And,
Yeah.
and she's having a go and saying, oh, you know, it's disgusting and it's wrong and it's unnatural. And the friend admits her sexuality to her. And I like what she says, and I'm going to quote it. She says, 5 seconds ago, I was someone else, and now I'm someone completely different. What's changed?
Yeah, no, that was so
That was
powerful.
brilliant.
Yeah, 100%. That was one of the best moments of the film.
Yeah. The film does have really good moments like that, and really well directed, really well performed. So I think it's definitely worth a watch. It feels like a really quality film. Personally, I do feel like it builds up to sort of an emotional climax that didn't happen for me. But I'm glad to hear that it worked for Warren. That's great.
Thanks, Suzy. What are we watching next week?
Next week, we are looking at a 6-part documentary series on SBS On Demand, Planet Sex,
Ooh.
with Cara Delevingne.
Oh.
Explores questions about human sexuality, examining issues including relationships, sex appeal, and the popularity of pornography. That's Planet Sex on SBS On Demand. And I'll see you next Tuesday.
See you, Suzy. I can't wait to talk about that.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. And what we spoke about today was My Policeman, which is currently streaming on Amazon Prime.
Joy Drive on Joy 94.9 FM in Melbourne, Joy on your digital radio, iHeartRadio, TuneIn.com or the Joy app. No matter where you are, you can always take Em and Warren with you.